and welcome to Let's Talk Climate. We're glad you're here today. Before we jump into our discussion, here are some brief housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be available for viewing and sharing on ecoAmerica's YouTube channel. Please engage with us online using the hashtag Let's Talk Climate throughout our discussion and in the days to come. And please use the chat function to ask questions, which we may answer live on air. You can send your questions to us by choosing all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat box. ecoAmerica staff are also standing by to answer any tech questions and to help facilitate the Q&A. Okay, let's get started. Today on Let's Talk Climate, we are talking about hot communities, cool projects. I'm Denise Powell, your host, and ecoAmerica's new Path to Positive Program Director. Joining us today is Jonathan Parfrey, Executive Director of Climate Resolve. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, how are you? Great to be here.
Thanks for coming in. Before we dive into our discussion, I just want to say I make my home near Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I reside upon the unceded land of the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Algonquin tribes. Milwaukee is known in their languages as the gathering place by the waters or the pleasant land. I ask you to join me in acknowledging this region's diverse and vibrant Native peoples, their communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations, who show strength and resilience amidst a backdrop of ongoing colonialism and oppression. Let this acknowledgement and all like it demonstrate the commitment to dismantle the ongoing legacies of colonialism. And speaking of pleasant lands, Jonathan, we are so glad to have you here with us and to talk about the work that Climate Resolve has done in Los Angeles, bringing people together around cool solutions. So let's explore what's cool in LA. New ecoAmerica research has found that extreme heat is the #1 severe weather event noticed by Americans, and that 79% say that they have noticed more extreme heat waves in the past few years. So Jonathan, in Los Angeles, you've helped implement innovative solutions around urban cooling. One solution is Climate Resolve's Cool Roofs initiatives. Can you explain what they are, how they work, and what individuals can do to bring them forward?
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Powell. I just also would like to do a land acknowledgement. Here in Southern California, we're on the land of the Tongva, Tatavian, and Chumash people who lived very harmoniously with these lands for thousands of years. So the Cool Roof program in Los Angeles, I'm really happy to report, we now have over 50,000 roofs of residential homes in the Los Angeles area that now have cool roofs, and many of whom are the most aggressive cool roofs of anywhere in the United States. There's a solar reflectance value that we champion, and that solar reflectance value right now is currently at 0.25, which means that 25% of all the sunlight that strikes it is bounced back into space. And that's for residential roofs that are at a slant. For the flat roofs, we're currently well over 60% solar reflectance. And we're very excited about these policies because they've really influenced a great many other municipalities throughout the United States. In fact, now it's transferred from looking at roofs to using that same principles of physics to bounce sunlight back into space on our streets, on our playgrounds, and our parking lots. In fact, there's a wonderful organization that we work very closely with called the Global Cool Cities Alliance, led by Kurt Schickman. And he has an initiative right now across the United States of working with various municipalities to reflect sunlight back into space by just the use of these products on our roads. The city of Phoenix is doing that today. The city of Los Angeles has, I think, 10 miles of cool pavement right now. and with more on the way.
Great. Thank you for that. And knowing that this is something that there's a large movement for, can we dive into this a little deeper? We have some questions from audience members, and they want to know what are the actual climate benefits of reducing this reflection on roads and other paved surfaces?
So that's a real softball question, and I appreciate it, whoever asked it. Thank you very much. It benefits in any number of ways. One of the primary ways is that it reduces energy use. So you have a cool roof. It means that that heat isn't absorbed by that house, and it doesn't warm up that house. And so because of that, the air conditioning and refrigeration is less of a burden on the grid. So you're using less electricity, and unfortunately, for much of the United States, a lot of our electricity is generated by the burning of fossil fuels. The second way it gets at the heart of climate change is through what's called solar forcing. When the solar radiation strikes a more brightly colored surface, it bounces back, it's reflected into space. And because of that, it then doesn't become part of the terrestrial system of warming that we've been experiencing. And that also reduces greenhouse gas emissions.
I believe that does answer the question. There's another question that just popped up that I think is very timely for those organizations that are wanting to do similar projects. Kathy from our audience asks, are there any funding opportunities to help roll out cooling solutions?
There can be. I have a wonderful thing to report that in California, our organization we built a very large coalition, and we just helped pass a budget. In fact, it was a trailer bill. The budget passed in July, but we got this trailer bill to start a new extreme heat funding program in the state of California to the tune of $800 million. And we're very excited by this. And we would hope that this could be influential with the Biden administration when it's looking at its infrastructure investments or the reconciliation investments going forward. So this budget includes funding for trees in the urban setting. Trees are probably the best way of cooling down communities, casting shade, especially the shade that can be over homes. So those homes, again, are shaded and they don't have to then use as much electricity to generate, to cool down the home or have refrigeration. Then there are ways in which we can actually build our homes better. I referenced the cool roofs, but there's cool walls too. Very exciting new projects of new innovations coming out on sidings and different paints that are being used that are much more in line with our climate reality. And then we're very excited about this concept of community resilience hubs, where existing community-based organizations become microgrids. They're powered by solar. They're also battery storage. And in Los Angeles, we need atmospheric water machines that pulls water out of the very air so that if our grid goes down, if our aqueducts are no longer operative, we can have communities still be resilient. And they'll go to the trusted community-based organizations that can really provide those services. We work very closely with a group called the Urban Sustainability Directors Network to champion these resilience hubs in California. And now we have $200 million to get them launched. It's super exciting. And last but not least, we are launching a program out of the governor's office, which is going to be an integrated extreme heat program in California. And we're hoping that this package on climate resilience, with a big emphasis on protecting lives through mitigating extreme heat, could be influential in other places as well. when LA did its Cool Roof program, I'm happy to report it kind of spread throughout the country. When we innovated on cool streets, it's now being rolled out in other places. So we're hoping that what happens in California doesn't stay in California.
I have to say, Jonathan, I think that's wonderful. And you've clarified that there are definitely funding opportunities out there. And there's more than that. There are resources, tools, groups, partnerships that can also help organizations get started on cooling solutions and cooling projects in their communities. Thank you. That's awesome. I just want to stick with the heat issue a little bit longer. As we are seeing in Los Angeles and in other parts of the country, cities across the nation, and all across the globe, quite frankly, hot days are getting hotter and more frequent with more intense heat waves. Over the past decade, daily record high temperatures have occurred twice as often as record lows across the continental United States. And that's up a near 1-to-1 ratio from the 1950s. So communities with fewer trees and green spaces are more vulnerable to this heat. And those communities tend also to be areas with low-income residents and people of color. Climate Resolve has really focused on helping those communities. Can you tell us more about your other programs and the impact that they are having on vulnerable communities? And what can people in communities outside of LA learn from your work in this area?
Well, I really encourage folks to go to the USDN website and look up the resilience hubs. I noticed that Jess Gray has put a URL in the chat, and I really encourage you to click on that, because I think this is the answer. Can I tell you what's not the answer?
Okay.
At least in Los Angeles, cooling centers. I make it my personal practice to go out to cooling centers, and I have yet, after visiting many of them, to see a single person inside of one. We send money out to these cooling centers. We do these wonderful PSAs over the radio, and it sounds like the government is doing something about cooling and protecting people. Well, what happens when our emergency rooms are filled and our cooling centers are empty? We have to come up with a better solution. And that's why we're big supporters of resilience hubs. And so, again, a resilience hub is a place in a community. We're prioritizing low-income BIPOC communities for the rollout of these resilience hubs. We're working with a group right now. They're called the Boyle Heights Arts Conservatory, and I'm pleased to report that the City of Los Angeles, our municipal utility, LA Department of Water and Power, US Green Building Council is involved, and we are getting some philanthropy to come in and create this resilience hub in Boyle Heights, which is another way of saying East LA. And we're really excited about this because people are already going to this community-based organization. It's already loved, it's already used, and they have this wonderful programmatic activities, so that in a cooling center, by contrast, what you have are metal chairs in a rec center or in a basketball court, and people are supposed to sit around and do nothing, but they'll be cool. And that doesn't make sense to me. It's not attractive. It doesn't draw people in. But a resilience hub done correctly, like the Boyle Heights Arts Conservatory, in our view, could be a model for Southern California, if not beyond our borders.
And Jonathan, I think that actually really dovetails well into my next question, that local partnership, that focus, and I'd say developing connections that actually work for the residents of the communities that the organizations are trying to serve. I've had the great fortune to know many community organizations across the country working closely with residents and stakeholders to organize, mobilize, and affect systems change to make communities more resilient to extreme heat and flooding. So could you share a little bit about Climate Resolve's local partners and the collective impact of those partnerships, particularly in engaging Angelenos in climate action?
Sure. So the city of Los Angeles, it's the second largest city in the country, over 4 million souls here in LA. And we have a general plan that is supposed to plan for the future. But the city is so big that we actually have divided up the city into 35 neighborhoods, the city has. And there are now 35 different community plans being developed as part of the general plan to prepare for the future. The thing that we found interesting is that they weren't even talking about climate change. They weren't even talking about extreme heat. And so what we pivoted to do, and there's a website that we have, and Jess, if you don't mind putting it up there, it's our climateplans.la website, is to work with community-based organizations that are in these communities, that are already there, and to work with them so that it's their voice, not ours, as the interceding, nonprofit that steps in, but providing the tools and understanding of the climate impacts so that the communities themselves will say, we need more trees. The communities themselves will say, we need to make sure that there's resilience hubs, that there's a place to get water if our imported water is somehow shut off by a major earthquake, which, by the way, all of our aqueducts cross the main major earthquake fault in Southern California. And it's expected that when the big one hits, Southern California will be without water for months. And so that will be our biggest issue. And so if we have things that are powered by photovoltaics to provide water out of the air, that could be a real lifesaver for folks. So there's that. And there's also working with groups so that it's in solidarity. It's not like we're coming in and we're saying, do something on climate. It's our job to make climate part and parcel of what people are really thinking about, what they're really caring about, what's really important to them. I don't know how many people woke up this morning and said, boy, I really care about extreme heat. There might be a couple people on this call, but most people didn't. They're thinking about, are my kids going to get a good education? Do I have enough money to pay the utility bills? Is there decent food for my family in this area? There's a lot of drugs and junk going in my neighborhood. What can I do about it? That's what they're thinking about. And so as a climate activist, for us to come in and think that we're going to, like through making foie gras, make people become climate activists, we have it totally wrong. We have to hear people where they're coming from. We have to understand that we're working in solidarity with them to accomplish their goals and what they want to see in the city, and harmonize that with achieving the climate goals that'll help communities become more resilient.
Thanks for that. And I think that's the key. That's a key point. Doing the work that's informed by community need. Their voices are at the table, and that's where we start. I do have another question for you related to community mobilization. It's from Holly. She asks, how can a small nonprofit on a 12-acre preserve in Southwest Florida become a resilience hub? So I'm curious as to if maybe you would have some advice for her.
I'm very sympathetic with your situation in Florida. You have a lot of challenges there. I don't know if I have an answer for you. In California, one of the things that we're exploring right now, in addition to state dollars. So you may not have that in Florida, but maybe you could get it related to hazard mitigation associated with hurricanes. So FEMA does have a project called BRIC, and the BRIC funding is there to prevent future hazards. There's that old saying that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I think that's very true. And thankfully, we have a federal government program that really believes in that. So I would look up the BRIC program. But if you want to do it on your own, there is something that we're exploring, which is an assessment district where people are willing to, either through a parcel tax or through some other measure, actually tax themselves within a certain area. In California, we have tools to be able to do that. I don't know about Florida, but we're exploring this idea so that certain communities could indeed say, this is important to us. We're in a wildfire zone. We need to be able to remove vegetation. We need to be able to harden our homes. We need to be able to have infrastructure in the event of fire coming in. And we're willing to tax ourselves in this discrete area. It could be very small. And we're willing to pay that in order to have that added benefit. In fact, there's something called a tax increment financing district, because when people start doing those things and those improvements, the property value increases. And you can take that increment of that additional funds that come in through the higher appraisals of your property and use that as a means of financing things. It's like borrowing a little bit from the future to make you future ready, is the basic concept. I don't know if that applies to Florida, but we're experimenting with ways of doing that here in California.
Well, usually when it works with one community, it'll work with another, and then they'll be able to present it and maybe move it forward. I love the idea of seeing your tax dollars at work, like you're paying in and you're prepaying for that future and making the future just a little bit better.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears a little bit. Our research at ecoAmerica shows that there is room to grow for American confidence in our elected officials to act on climate. I know that the work your organization does requires the support and cooperation of state and local officials, and not only their support, Jonathan, but their support and cooperation, but also their endorsement and advocacy. And Climate Resolve has been very successful at cultivating those relationships. Could you share some best practices for working with local officials?
Sure. Well, here's something to talk, when you're talking about extreme heat, there's actually something an elected official can do about it, which when it comes to climate change, which is a global phenomenon, where if the emission happens from a tailpipe in Mumbai or Buenos Aires or Irvine, California, it kind of doesn't matter. It's going into the global climate system. And so that is a really tough one for a local elected official to tackle, because a city could go carbon neutral, and I hope they do, but it won't mean anything in this global system of climate change, where we need dramatic reductions across the globe. But when it comes to extreme heat, there is something that a local official can do. So here in Los Angeles, Mayor Eric Garcetti put in his sustainability plan that he plans to reduce the ambient temperature of Los Angeles by 3 degrees by the year 2035. And what this policy initiative did is, even though we can quibble on the scientific merits of doing such a thing, because there's some issues there, but be it as it may, it sends a message to all the agencies that they have official permission to pursue this as a policy goal. So that is something that we think is very, very, very helpful, because now all of the agency directors are going, oh yeah, that's something that we really need to do. That's something that we really need to pursue. And it's given license for much more action on extreme heat than I've seen previous to that policy declaration. So Mayor Garcetti wants to demonstrate, I'm going to make our city cooler. And I think that is a very exciting thing. And so it's something that any mayor of any city can say, and there are things that you can do. There's planting more trees, there's cool roofs and cool walls, there's the cool streets that I've described, there's the like just changing our parking lots, changing our playgrounds in making them more beautiful, livable spaces. In plazas, they can create giant umbrellas. I wish you could see what they've done in some cities in Texas, as well as in Saudi Arabia, on these giant umbrellaed plazas. They're actually quite beautiful. We can have bus stops, that actually provide shade and water. And we believe in grass. We think grass, even though there's a big thing about artificial grass is a petroleum product that creates more heat than even an asphalt pavement street. It has a much higher solar absorptive process than even a street. And then we believe water is very helpful. Water fountains are great. And again, resilience hubs. There are things that we can do. We are not powerless to do things on extreme heat. And it's a way of showing the public, I'm a political leader, I'm doing something to protect you. And that leads me to my next point, very briefly. I think that the climate advocates have a problem, that the way that we talk about these issues, with the exception of ecoAmerica, by the way, is that it's almost like we have a point to make. We have a principle that we're following, and we want to force our ideas on climate change on everyone else. Do you know what dealing with extreme heat says? That we actually care about people. We actually want people to be safe and protected. And in reality, I think that should be upfront the motivation of climate activists. Rather than talking about greenhouse gas emissions and curbing this and forcing things through, there should be a sense of compassion and care for our community. And working on extreme heat puts that up front and makes that a priority. And that, for me, is why I'm really excited to work on extreme heat, because it changes the narrative on the kind of crazy climate activist who wants to force something on everybody, to a person who's actually caring about their community and trying to make things better.
And I think no matter what side of the aisle you sit on, compassion and caring, that goes very far on either side. So thank you for that one. That's a very, I think it's important that we see the best practices, that we understand how we get there, and aligning ourselves, having that common goal it's just, that's the way it gets things done. So a follow-up question, though, would be, what advice would you give other community-based organizations who may want to start a project in their cities or towns? You've mentioned a couple of programs kind of at a federal level, but what if they're just getting started? Holly talked about a 68-bed community garden. They're working on a food forest. Those are very small projects. And so it may seem like it's harder to get it off the ground right away because funding may be tight. What would you suggest? How do they get started? How do they move it forward?
Well, I hope this is a good suggestion. It might be very dependent on where you live. I really believe in good science as a precursor to good policy. So there are ways of downscaling global climate models to make them relevant to specific communities. And the greater the downscaling, to try to get it to like a neighborhood scale, the better. And when you're able to present not only our climate present, but our climate future in a way that's highly relevant to where people are living, and you talk about it in a highly relevant way, putting forward solutions that are part of that message. And that's something that ecoAmerica, I think, has done brilliantly over the years. It's part of their personality, is to talk about the issue of climate change, but also following it up very brilliantly with exciting solutions to the issue. I think if you frame it that way, it really helps, but it starts with science. So let me tell you a story of a study that was done here in Los Angeles. This was a work of a group called Tree People. It was called the LA Cooling Collaborative. Global Cool Cities Alliance was also one of the nonprofits, as was Climate Resolve. And we were looking at the city of Los Angeles, different neighborhoods, and looked at past heat waves. And of course, we had our climate scientists from Arizona State, the best heat scientists in the country, University of Miami, as well as UCLA epidemiologists. So it wasn't a bunch of activists, it was actually real scientists. And they were looking at, what if we had trees? What if we had reflective surfaces in Los Angeles during those killer heat waves? Would we save lives? And they found that 1 in 4 lives that were lost in those heat waves could have been saved. And those people were, again, low-income communities of color that didn't have air conditioning or didn't have the money to turn on their air conditioning, and may also not have the tree canopies that wealthier neighborhoods had, so that natural cooling, there's a disparity of who has trees and who doesn't have trees in Los Angeles. And if we had that infrastructure, would it save lives? And the answer is yes. And I'm happy to report that there is right now a follow-up study, not on mortality, but on morbidity, on what would the injuries and diseases associated with extreme heat, if we could avoid that. And then the next study has to be on costs. So what we need to bring home with absolute clarity to policymakers, and I think this is a precursor almost for a lot of this work for a lot of the country, it's like, we have to tell people that the denominator is shifting on climate change. It's getting hotter. And so by doing nothing, we're putting ourselves in precarity. But by acting now, we can not only save lives, but we can save treasure. And I'm afraid that that is a very important argument in the American system. So if we can tell people that if we have more trees, we have reflective surfaces, we have water going out to people, we stop doing stupid stuff like artificial grass and deep, dark asphalt. We stop doing the dumb, and we really focus in on protecting people, we'll save money. And the data is emerging, it's coming. But I almost feel like when we have that in our hand, and it's not just a bunch of lefties out here in California, but the rest of the country does similar studies, and it makes the financial case. I think then the money really should flow.
Yes. So I just want to sum it up in a couple of sentences. I think what you're suggesting is for implementation, and just as I've run several small nonprofits, so I understand exactly kind of what the need is here. You want to root your work in the science. You want it to downscale the larger picture into something that fits into your community. You're creating a vision for a relevant climate future, something that politicians and other folks in power can get behind. And then you're taking those solutions and applying them to real world issues in a practical way. Would that kind of sum it up there, Jonathan, or did I miss anything?
It totally works for me.
Okay, perfect. Let's just do, there's one last question actually we have from the audience. This relates to youth involvement. And Janine is asking, what are the ways to engage youth in getting involved at the community level to address climate change and preserving an environment that keeps kids healthy?
What I'm about to say, I hope isn't vulgar to anyone, but it's the way I talk about it here in Los Angeles. It's called the tuchus theory of organizing. You got to keep people's tuchuses in the picture. And so you got to put people in the picture. So I think when it comes to the youth, I think it's very important that they see themselves in this climate phenomenon. And that they also see that there are tools that they have that they can do something about it. So it's put them in the picture, and then it's help them see that they can be, that they have agency, that there are things that they can do. I have to admit, I might want to quibble with some of our activist friends that keep pointing to national and international treaties. They've been doing this for 30 years. I love Al Gore, love the guy, but he keeps waiting for an international treaty. And the Paris Accord isn't even being adhered to, and it's all voluntary. I mean, we really need to have some wins. And if we have wins in various states, in my view, that can cascade into wins nationally and then cascade into international agreements. But we keep trying to throw the Hail Mary pass, and I think that can be very disempowering for young activists. They need to see some of the fruits of their organizing. But if the fruit of their organizing is an enforceable international treaty, oh my God, I want it, I do, but is that really the best organizing message for young people? I don't know.
Not sure myself, but Jess actually put something in the chat that I think is very useful in thinking about how youth impact climate action. And it says here more than 1 in 3, so 35% of Americans believe that youth-led protests are moving America towards climate action.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting.
It is, and they're not waiting for Superman to show up to save us. They're doing the work themselves.
Here in Los Angeles County, our organization has been working with LA County and with an engineering firm called Burrow Happold. They did the New York City Sustainability Plan, and they did LA City Sustainability Plan. And the new study that we're working on with Burrow Happold and the county is something called the Climate Vulnerability Assessment. And it goes beyond just the data on what's happening. It's looking at the second tier impacts, the social vulnerabilities that exist within the Los Angeles area and within communities. And there's 2 researchers, Jessica Ravinsky and Juliet Finziehart, who have been looking at the cascading impacts. Like, what are the linchpin things that if those things aren't working, there's going to be a lot of problems downstream. Mm-hmm. What do we absolutely need to take care of? And I just wanted to share with you their findings. This report is coming out in like 2 weeks, but I'll give you a preview. So it's workforce. If you don't have people, you're in trouble. If you don't have people in the hospitals, what we're discovering with the COVID epidemic, you're in trouble. If you don't have utility workers who know how to fix the grid, you're in big trouble. You need to have a strong, smart workforce that can really help bail you out in times. And if you don't have that, the bouncing back is impossible. The second thing you need is electricity, because if you don't have electricity, you don't have water pumps to move the water around. And if there's a fire, you need the water. So that's a big issue here in California. If you don't have the electricity, the air conditioning goes down, or the air filtration from the smoke from the fires can't be fixed. So communications goes down if you don't have electricity. So we've been having these planned power shutoffs in California because of our extreme heat events and because of our wildfires, where the grid is either too taxed that there's not enough electrons to be distributed during these heat waves, or when there's such high winds that a branch could knock down a transmission line and start a fire. And so the state has given permission to our utilities not have to electrify those lines, which means that people's electricity is going off. Those two areas, workforce and electricity, I think are really interesting areas to have further study in the future. The other thing is, everyone is thinking about bond measures when it comes to climate resilience. And I think it's an error, because we need, again, workforce. Bond measures don't pay for O&M, they don't. So we could build all these great things, but if we don't have people operating them, we need people in the resilience hubs. So we need that O&M dollars, and we need to think about climate resilience in that way.
So Jonathan, just for our audience members who maybe don't understand what a bond measure is, could you explain that?
Sure. A bond measure is a way that government or even private industry can say, send me money and I'll send you money back in the future with a little bit of interest. It's borrowing money, but when a government does it, it does it out of a general fund. Those kinds of projects that are funded through bond measures are typically capital projects. It would be like building a dam, but it's not operating the dam. You have to have tax dollars to operate the dam.
Thanks for that explanation. It actually, it's a great transition into one last question, because I just had an audience member ask another one. And Oreo says, it's so great to hear about the new funding in the recent California budget. Could you talk about what was left out of the budget this year and what policies that you would like to see state leaders pursue?
We had a very funny situation in California where we suddenly found that we had an extra $100 billion in revenue that we weren't anticipating. So this is a strange budget year, let me tell you. So everyone has been operating out of this kind of deficit mentality for so long in California, rubbing two nickels together to create a quarter to try to make something happen. And all of a sudden there's an extra $100 billion. So it really caught us by surprise. And so the budget that we have been working on this last year, a lot of it has gone for wildfire relief. A lot of it has gone to COVID relief, a lot of it has gone to unemployment insurance to help people get through this hard time. And a lot of it has gone into healthcare and biotechnology to help prod along some solutions related to COVID. And so even though I just described this very exciting budget, there's still things that didn't get allocated. So for example, those heat programs I described to you and the resilience hubs, there's not enough money in this fiscal year. They're slated for the next 2 fiscal years. So the governor's office and the other agencies are going to be spending time developing these programs in the hope that next July, when our fiscal year begins, July 2022, there's going to be this tranche of money that they can work with. So if I had my druthers, we would have had money for resilience hubs. We would have had money for extreme heat this fiscal year. And then, you know, California has been a huge leader in greenhouse gas mitigation policy. We have a bill, AB 32, that put us on track to be at 1990 levels by the year 2020. We have a bill, SB 32, that says we have to be 40% below 1990 levels by the year 2030. We're on track to reach those goals, mainly from the electricity sector. Right now, producing electrons in the state of California is getting close to 10% of our greenhouse gas emissions. Our utility, Southern California Edison, is going to be at 80% non-carbon electricity within a few years. It's been a rapid revolution on the electricity sector. The more difficult sector is on transportation, which is now well above 50% of our emissions comes from people driving their kids to school. And we have to figure out a way of altering that. I don't think EVs alone are the answer. We have to find ways of planning our cities in a new and unique way to really get at those greenhouse gas emissions. So a robust policy related to drawing down transportation emissions, we need that. Unfortunately, there are some major impediments, including the United States Constitution, which has its Commerce Clause. So California can't say, oh yeah, that thing called diesel fuel, yeah, we don't want to use it anymore. We can't do that. We can't tell people to move to electric vehicles. We can't mandate it. There are limits of the policy measures that we can enact locally. The ships that come into the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, or even though they may move 40% of the import and exports out of the United States through these two ports through LA County, we don't have the regulatory ability to manage the trucks that are going in and out of those ports that create so much pollution and climate pollution, nor do we have the regulatory authority to deal with the ships themselves that are burning bunker fuel and diesel fuel right off the coast of Los Angeles and creating health harms in our communities, as well as greenhouse gas emissions. So we have to figure out the transportation problem, but we need our federal partners to also step up.
Well, thanks for that. I know that California has led the way on a lot of the environmental things and sustainability. So hopefully they'll be able to catch up on that transportation side. Jonathan, I have to say, I'm kind of sad. We are at the end of our time here, but clearly this topic has elicited great conversation, and your leadership is inspiring. I'm certain that our conversation today has also inspired our listeners about progress, community engagement, and local solutions to climate change. Thank you so much for joining us today.